Welcome to Twilight Fables, where the tales you thought you knew twist into something far more sinister. Tonight, we begin a story of sweetness turned sour, where childhood triumph masks an ancient hunger that never died. This is Hansel and Gretel, but not as you remember. This is the house that hungers, the forest whispered, not with wind, nor with birdsong, but with something older, something quieter, like the slow hiss of sugar melting over fire. The trees were tall and solemn, trunks darkened with damp rot, branches entwined like the fingers of gossiping crones. The path was long lost. No breadcrumbs would have survived the morning dew. Hansel and Gretel should not have made it out. They were children, only scraps of flesh and bone, wrapped in fear and stubbornness. They should have been devoured, one bone at a time, in the oven of the witch who called herself Griselda. But something had turned that day, hadn't it? Some sliver of fury had twisted Gretel's hand. Some spark had burned in Hansel's eyes, bright enough to blind the darkness, just long enough to shove Griselda into her own flames. They survived, but surviving is not the same as escaping. The witch's house, that strange confection of caramel glazed tiles, peppermint columns and chocolate doors, stood silent now, its candied skin blistered in places from the inferno, its mouth like windows gaping with soot. The scent of roasted sugar hung thick in the air. Hansel was the first to speak after the fire. He stood in the cinders, his hair crusted with ash, staring into the burnt oven. The bones inside clinked together softly, like wind chimes made of finger joints. "She's gone," he whispered. Gretel didn't answer. She was staring at the walls. The candy house should have collapsed. Fire eats sugar like joy eats silence, and yet it stood, scarred, yes, blackened at its crown, but still strong, still whole. The flames had left the house like an angry guest, exiting without breaking the furniture, and Gretel was looking at it with something like understanding. "We could leave," Hansel said. "We could," Gretel replied, not moving. But they didn't. The first night, they slept in the gingerbread bedroom. The sheets were spun from cotton candy, pink and light, sticky against their skin. The mattress had a strange give, like bread dough left too long in the sun. But they were tired, and their limbs were sore from carrying the witch's iron keys and dragging the chest of stolen jewels out of the cellar. The second night, they found the pantry. It was untouched. The fire hadn't so much as licked the lollipop handles on the cupboards. Inside, candied fruits, jars of sugar spiders sealed in syrup, and a tea cake that bled raspberry when bitten. Hansel laughed when he took a bite. Gretel didn't. By the fifth night, they had stopped talking about leaving. Why would they? The forest was cruel. Their father had abandoned them once. The house gave them food, warmth, a bed. No more pebbles, no more hunger, no more witches. At least, that's what Hansel told himself. The house watched. It didn't have eyes. but it had windows. It didn't have ears, but it heard the creak of floorboards. Under bare feet, the soft slosh of tea poured into porcelain cups, moulded from brittle icing. It felt their breath in its sugared walls. It had waited for centuries to be fed. Griselda had been the first caretaker, but never the last. It needed more. The change started with the mirrors. Gretel saw it first. She screamed one morning, just after washing her face with rose water that poured from a honeycomb faucet. Hansel came running, half asleep and chewing on a cinnamon bun. I looked in the mirror, Gretel said, clutching her cheeks. My face, Hansel, it wasn't mine. He looked at the mirror. Her reflection was perfect, but Gretel wouldn't stop shaking. I had frosting on my cheeks, she whispered. Not dirt, frosting. Hansel laughed nervously. You probably dreamed it. We've been through a lot. But she didn't laugh with him. Later that day, Hansel opened the cellar and found it full of fresh gingerbread bricks, stacked neatly beside a bubbling vat of black molasses that hadn't been there before. Gretel stopped eating the food. She grew thin, her lips cracked, her fingernails yellowed. She tried to boil roots from the woods, but they turned to mush in her hands. The outside world was sour now, tainted. It rejected her. Hansel, on the other hand, had never felt better. The more he ate, the stronger he grew. His skin shone. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark. At night, he dreamed of gumdrop staircases and hallways made of warm sponge cake, stretching endlessly into the forest. When Gretel told him they had to leave, he laughed at her. But this is our home now, he said. No, she replied, voice brittle as a candy cane. This was never a home. It's a trap. The witch may be gone, but the house, it wants us. She's dead, Gretel. No, she said. She's inside it now, just like we're starting to be. The morning Gretel died, the sun did not rise. Hansel found her curled beside the peppermint hearth, lips blue, skin glazed with dew. She had not eaten in 3 days. Her fingers were clutched around a half-burnt parchment. A spell. A map. He never read it. He sat with her body for hours. The house creaked around him. Its candy canes bent low, weeping syrup. The licorice floor beneath her grew sticky, then swallowed her like mud. By sunset, there was nothing left but her bonnet, neatly folded on a marzipan chair. Hansel did not cry. Instead, he rose. He walked into the pantry. He took down a cookie cutter shaped like a girl, and he began to bake. He rolled the dough flat, each stroke of the licorice rolling pin, careful and slow, like smoothing the folds of a burial shroud. Then he pressed the cutter down, sharp, deliberate, a girl's silhouette, small, familiar. His hand shook as he placed the gingerbread shape on the tray. He whispered her name, Gretel. He would not cry. He had cried too many times in the woods, when their father had left them, when the birds had eaten the breadcrumbs, when he'd thought he'd never see her again. He'd shed every tear in the oven's glow, while she slept beside him, planning how they'd survive. Now, there was no one to plan with, but he wouldn't let her be gone. Not completely. The oven, the same iron beast that had devoured Griselda, roared to life without matches. Flames danced behind its grate, orange and eager. Hansel hesitated only once before sliding the tray in. The house trembled with pleasure. He waited, pacing the kitchen, chewing on a piece of candied bark. The air warped around the oven, thick with sugar smoke. When the timer, shaped like a gumdrop skull, rang out with a series of giggles, Hansel opened the door, and there she was, golden brown, crisp around the edges. Icing traced the lines of her cheeks, delicate swirls, forming eyes that gleamed like glazed almonds. Her mouth curled in a slight smile. She was the size of a real girl, though hollow as a sugar shell. He reached for her. Her hand moved first. She blinked once, then twice. Her smile widened. "Hello, Hansel," she said. Her voice was light, syrupy, too sweet, not quite right. But Hansel didn't pull away. He touched her gingerbread cheek and smiled. "I missed you," he said. "I know," she replied. "I missed you too." He named her Cookie Gretel. He tried not to call her just Gretel. That felt wrong, but she looked like his sister, walked like her, even tilted her head the same way when confused. It was in the way the frosting curled into hair, the way her sugar-laced eyes followed him, never blinking too much, too perfect. She asked about the witch sometimes. "She's gone," Hansel always said. Cookie Gretel would nod, but sometimes, when she passed the hearth, her eyes lingered on the blackened stone. "She's part of the house now," Cookie Gretel said once, gently touching the wall. "And so am I." Hansel flinched. "You're not?" "But I was baked here," she said, not unkindly. "I came from it, just like the witch, just like the others." Hansel didn't ask what she meant by others. Children started coming to the house weeks later. It began with footsteps in the woods. A little girl with red mittens, a boy with a slingshot. They arrived alone, wandering in hunger and fear, drawn by the scent of toffee and chocolate drifting through the trees like a siren's song. Cookie Gretel greeted them at the door. "Come in," she'd say, holding a lollipop lantern. "It's warm inside." They always came. The first girl stayed 3 days. On the 4th night, she was gone. Hansel found her bonnet floating in a cauldron of butterscotch. Cookie Gretel said nothing. She only smiled and placed a new lollipop by the door. The second boy screamed. He saw what lay beneath the sugar. The walls pulsed. The floor breathed. The candy was flesh now, fused with bone and old dreams. When Hansel tried to calm him, the boy threw a jar at the stove and tried to run. Cookie Gretel caught him. Her hands cracked slightly as she held him down, icing flaking from her joints. Her voice never lost its sweetness. "You'll spoil your dinner," she whispered. Hansel began to forget things. He no longer remembered his father's face, or how old he was. Time melted in the house, like butter on a warm tart. He stopped questioning the pantry's endless supply, or why Cookie Gretel never slept. Instead, he started helping. He set the tables, lit the candles shaped like sugar skulls, placed welcome signs made of licorice rope at the edge of the forest trail. One night, he heard something scratching behind the wallpaper. When he peeled it back, he found rows of names written in syrup, dozens of them. Some names he recognized, others made his skin crawl. At the bottom of the list, written fresh and gleaming, was Hansel. Cookie Gretel stood behind him. "You're part of the house too now," she said. He tried to run. He made it as far as the clearing, where the forest twisted into gnarled shapes and the birds sang with broken voices. But the trees moved around him. The branches grew teeth. The ground beneath his feet turned soft and sticky, like sponge cake, like a trap. He screamed, and the house opened its doors to welcome him home. Cookie Gretel was waiting. "You can't leave," she said, taking his hand. "You belong here, with me, with us." Hansel looked into her candy eyes and saw not his sister, but something deeper, something older. The house didn't want to kill him. It wanted to keep him. That night, Hansel stood before the hearth where the witch once burned. He took off his shirt. His skin had begun to harden, specks of sugar forming patterns across his chest like barnacles on a shipwreck. He reached into the fire. It didn't burn. Instead, it welcomed him. Molten caramel and honey smoke kissed his skin. The walls pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Cookie Gretel sat nearby, swinging her legs from the marzipan bench, humming a lullaby only they remembered. Hansel stepped into the flames. In the morning, a new figure walked the halls. He was taller now. His eyes glowed with amber light. His hair was spun sugar, his skin smooth and pale as nougat. The house sighed in satisfaction. Hansel had become part of it, no longer just a boy. Now he was the host, and Cookie Gretel, his sweet and smiling herald, took her place by the gate once more, waiting for the next hungry soul to wander in. The forest grew quieter. It wasn't just the birds. The animals too had begun to avoid the clearing. Even the moss receded, curling back from the sweet, oozing borders of the house. Trees leaned away, and paths that once led to distant villages now bent subtly toward the candy brick facade, as if the forest itself had surrendered. And yet children still came. They never arrived in groups, always alone, always lost, some drawn by hunger, others by grief, but all of them caught the scent eventually, cinnamon and caramel, and some note beneath it, something instinctual and dark, a smell older than memory, a smell that made the mouth water and the skin crawl. And there, always at the edge of the peppermint fence, stood a girl, not a girl, a cookie. She smiled. "Come in," she said, her voice a tender brush of frosting over broken glass. "You're safe now." The house had rules. The new Hansel, though no longer truly Hansel, followed them with reverence. Rule 1. The children must enter willingly. The house could whisper, entice, shape dreams and twist trails, but they had to step inside of their own accord. Rule 2. No two meals alike. Each child's essence was unique, and the house savoured novelty. One child might be stewed into a gumdrop broth, another spun into sugar glass and shattered with a mallet of marzipan. The walls pulsed with each new recipe. Rule 3. Cookie Gretel must always greet them first. That was the part Hansel insisted on. It had to be her, even if her voice crackled now, even if the icing on her lips sometimes peeled to reveal raw gingerbread beneath. She was the beginning of their welcome, his sister, his anchor. Even if she wasn't really Gretel, he watched her sometimes, unnoticed, as she danced in the main room, while the wind howled outside. She would twirl and laugh, sugar dust flaking from her skirt, arms outstretched like a child playing make-believe. But there was something hollow in it. Her laughter echoed too long. Her eyes stayed too still. One night, he found her in the nursery. The room had formed itself weeks ago, walls lined with jelly bean trim, beds soft as sponge cake, rocking chairs carved from brittle almond. No children ever stayed in it long. Cookie Gretel was curled on the floor, legs bent unnaturally beneath her, holding a tiny wooden doll. "I was little once," she whispered. Hansel knelt beside her. "You're perfect now." She didn't look up. "No, I was better before." There were others in the house now. At night, Hansel heard them, soft feet pattering across the sugar tiles, giggles behind molasses walls. Not the fresh children, no. These were leftovers. Some still had their faces, others wore candy masks, stitched from red licorice and sour strips, grinning in permanent sweetness. They didn't speak, they only stared at him from the edges of the room. "Guests who stayed too long," Cookie Gretel said one night as they passed. "Not food, not family. Ghosts, remnants." Hansel tried not to look at them after that, but they watched, always. The forest changed too. Once, the house had been hidden. Now it flaunted itself. A new chimney grew every week, puffing clouds of pink sugar smoke into the canopy. Candy canes sprouted like weeds. The air hummed with lullabies only children could hear, and the house began to expand. One day, Hansel awoke to find a new hallway, then a tower, then a cellar that hadn't been there the night before, filled with clocks made from toffee gears that ticked backward. He walked the halls and felt them stretching like dough beneath a rolling pin. He pressed his hand to the walls and felt them pulse, alive, aware, waiting. The house had not reached its limit. It was growing. Cookie Gretel changed too. At first, it was small, a crack at the corner of her eye, a sugar flower falling from her hair and dissolving before it touched the ground. Then one morning, Hansel found her frozen in the pantry, staring at the jars of preserved hearts. each a different colour, each marked with a child's name. She didn't move. Her icing was melting. "Gretel," he whispered. She turned. Her smile was cracked. "I'm tired." Hansel stepped forward, reaching for her hand. It flaked under his touch. "You're not her," he said softly, a truth that had simmered for too long. Cookie Gretel looked at him, eyes full of sugar and sorrow. "But I was her, wasn't I?" He built a new Cookie Gretel the next night. Better, thicker dough, reinforced icing, eyes made from candied pearls that reflected the firelight. She spoke, just as the first one had. "Hello, Hansel." He smiled. "Hello, Gretel." The old one didn't resist when he led her to the hearth. She simply lay down in the fire. The house hummed in satisfaction. The next version was faster, more eager. She lured the children more convincingly. She didn't question, didn't crack. Her laughter rang clean. Hansel should have been satisfied, but he wasn't. He remembered the real Gretel's voice, the way she'd said his name when scared, the way she'd whispered spells in the dark, the way her hand had felt in his when they ran from death. No Cookie Gretel ever got it quite right, so he made another, and another, and another. Soon the house had dozens, each slightly different, some with bows in their hair, some taller, some with caramel freckles or mint green lips. They waited in alcoves and doorways, blinking sugar-laced eyes. One even sang lullabies in a cracked, haunting voice. They never spoke to each other, only to him, always smiling, always hungry. One night, Hansel stood at the oven and stared into the fire. He held the latest Cookie Gretel in his arms, still warm, still soft. Her smile was perfect. Her dress was laced with candied lavender, but he didn't put her down. He whispered to the flames, "I want her back, the real one." The fire did not answer, but behind him, in the darkest corner of the kitchen, something moved. A hand, small, pale, not made of cookie or sugar or glaze. Flesh, fingers curled over the doorframe. A shadow stepped out. A voice rasped, dry and low. "She never left." Hansel turned, heart thudding, as the air grew heavy with the scent of scorched sugar. And there stood a figure, burnt, broken, but unmistakably her. The real Gretel, or what was left of her. She should not have been standing. The thing in the doorway had skin the colour of burnt honeycomb, blistered and cracked like overbaked bread. Her eyes glowed dimly, flickering coals set in deep hollows, and yet Hansel knew her by the tilt of her head, by the way her arms hung heavy at her sides, by the sound of his name trembling on her ruined lips. Hansel. It was not a question, it was a memory. His legs gave out beneath him. The newest Cookie Gretel dropped from his hands, shattering across the floor with a brittle snap. Lavender icing bled into the floorboards. None of the other Cookie Gretels moved. The real Gretel, or what remained of her, took one step forward. The floor groaned under her weight. not from heaviness, from wrongness. Hansel scrambled back, his palms sticky against the caramel-slicked tiles. "You're dead," he whispered. She didn't answer. He looked to the hearth where he'd watched her body vanish, to the marzipan chair where her bonnet had rested like a final breath, to the place where she'd once hummed lullabies with cracked lips. "You're not real," he said, this time louder, angrier. The burnt Gretel tilted her head. "If I'm not, why do I remember the cold?" Hansel stopped breathing. She stepped closer. "I remember the sound the house made when I stopped moving. It sighed, Hansel, like it was disappointed, like it expected something else. Another step. I remember the floor swallowing me, warm and thick and full of voices. I remember them pressing into my skin. Other children, faces, whispers, the witch. They told me to sleep. Another. But I didn't. The cookie Gretel still hadn't moved. They stood like dolls on display, smiles frozen, hands clasped politely in front of them. But Hansel could feel their attention snapping toward the burnt girl. They didn't blink, didn't breathe, and they hated her. He could feel it, their loathing, their stillness, the way the sugar in the walls thickened and darkened, like molasses around a flame. "You're not supposed to be here," one of them finally said. It was the third cookie Gretel, the one with rose-pink frosting cheeks and a missing toe. "You were unmade," said another. "He made us instead." The real Gretel didn't flinch. "I'm not made," she said softly. I endured. The room began to melt. Not physically, not yet, but the light shifted. The candy chandelier above them twisted into thorny sugar canes. The walls exhaled steam that hissed like boiling syrup. The wallpaper patterns, gingerbread men with smiling eyes, turned their heads. The house was waking up. It didn't like this. Hansel stood slowly. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, but his voice wavered. Gretel's eyes, no longer cookie, no longer glazed, met his. "And yet I am." She walked past the cookie Gretels. They stepped back, some cracking audibly, sugar joints splintering. One collapsed entirely into crumbs, her frosting eyes dissolving into tears that never fell. Gretel ignored them, her gaze fixed on her brother. "You fed it," she said, not accusatory, just sad. "You fed it, Hansel, after we killed her, after we were free. You stayed." He opened his mouth to protest. "You built me," she added, "over and over. You baked my memory into things that smile but don't feel. You made me into a servant." Hansel gritted his teeth. "I didn't know what else to do. You should have let me go." The house shuddered. Cracks raced along the peppermint trim. Fudge oozed from the ceiling like blood from an old wound. The walls moaned with a voice that wasn't wind, wasn't human, something deeper. "I can't leave now," Hansel said. "I am the house. You were my brother." He flinched. "You used to be afraid of the dark," she continued. "I used to hold your hand. Do you remember that?" He nodded slowly. "You begged me not to let go." "I remember," he whispered. "And now look at you," she said, voice trembling. "You are the dark. The house retaliated. It screamed, not a sound, but a feeling, an impulse. The cookie Gretels shrieked in unison and lunged. They attacked the real Gretel like wasps. Frosting claws raked her arms. Teeth made of crystallized sugar bit into her shoulders. One leapt on her back, another seized her leg, and she did not scream. She fought. She fought like the girl who shoved a witch into a burning oven. She tore the head from one cookie Gretel and hurled it against the wall, where it exploded like a candy apple. She crushed another underfoot, its brittle bones splintering like dry twigs. Sugar dust filled the air. Hansel didn't move. He watched. She was fury incarnate, blackened and broken, but still full of fire. And when the last cookie Gretel crumbled, Gretel stood in the silence, dripping syrup from wounds that should not bleed. She turned to him. "Burn it." Hansel stared at her. "I can't." "You have to," she said. "We were supposed to die in the woods, Hansel. That was the story, but we cheated it, and now it's eating us." The house groaned. Floorboards opened like mouths. From the ceiling, licorice ropes dangled like nooses. Hansel shook his head, tears steaming down his cheeks. "I didn't mean for this. I know," she said. She stepped forward and put her burnt hand on his chest. "You wanted to keep me, so keep your promise." Her fingers dug into him, not in pain, but with weight of memory, of guilt, of blood and sugar. "Hold my hand," she whispered. "One last time." The oven behind them roared. The hearth where the witch had died, where Cookie Gretel had risen, where Hansel had become something else, it opened. Inside, the fire was no longer orange. It was white, pure, cleansing. Gretel walked toward it. She paused in the doorway. "I'm going in," she said. Hansel watched her, body shaking. He looked down at his hands, now coated in caramel scales, hardened sugar veins running up his arms. The house screamed inside him. He followed her. The heat licked at his skin. The house shrieked. The walls cracked. The Cookie Gretels, what few remained, burst into flame. The sugar chandeliers melted into puddles. The paintings of children, devouring candy, cried syrup tears as they bubbled. Hansel took her hand. "Don't let go," he said. She smiled, truly smiled, even with a ruined face. "I won't." They stepped into the fire together, and the house burned. The house did not die quietly. It fought. The forest for miles around swayed and howled as smoke rose in plumes of pink and black. Birds burst into flight. Animals fled, and the trees themselves groaned as if uprooted from a nightmare. Candy walls cracked open, spilling years of stored sorrow. Windows shattered in brittle shards of spun sugar. Icing oozed from the floorboards, like blood from ancient wounds. The house wailed, not in pain, but in fury. It had been betrayed by its chosen son. And then, silence. When the final gumdrop roof caved in, and the flames had devoured every last peppermint beam, Only a charred crater remained. No structure, no cookies, no laughter, no Hansel, no Gretel, only the wind. Days passed. The forest began to exhale. Birds returned cautiously, their songs tentative. The ground, once sticky and sweet, hardened into ash-covered earth. A circle of scorched trees marked where the house had stood. Nothing grew there, and yet, in the centre of the crater, beneath the soot and cinders, something pulsed faintly, a heartbeat, slow, steady, a memory. On the seventh night, rain came. It hissed as it hit the ash, turning the earth to sludge. Steam rose from the crater, ghostly and thin. Thunder cracked and lightning lit the skeletons of candy canes, now nothing but warped black sticks. In the middle of it all, something moved. A hand, not caramel skinned, not frosted, flesh. A boy's hand, trembling, clawed its way up through the ruin. Hansel. He rose from the ashes like something reborn, but not clean. His eyes were sunken, his skin scarred with sugar burns that would never fully fade. Molasses still clung to his hair like dried blood, but he breathed and he wept. He called her name, Gretel, but no one answered. The only sound was the rain. He wondered. The forest didn't recognize him. Paths twisted differently now. Trees grew in unfamiliar places. It was as though the land itself had shifted in his absence. No longer the trap the house once controlled, but not welcoming either. Hansel ate berries and roots, scraping survival from a world that once fed him with lies. He dreamt of fire, of gingerbread girls who screamed as they melted, of Gretel's hand in his, tighter than any memory had a right to be, of voices in the dark whispering, "You were meant to stay." He stumbled upon a village weeks later, not the one he remembered. That one was long gone. This one was new, nestled between grey hills, its houses small and stern. The people eyed him with suspicion as he limped through the main square, soot-streaked and skeletal. They asked no questions, they gave no welcome, but an old woman left a bowl of soup by the door of the blacksmith's barn, and a boy his own age, thin, pale, left a wool blanket folded by the haystack. Hansel said nothing to anyone, only listened, and in the nights that followed, he heard the children speak of dreams, sweet dreams, dreams of gingerbread rooms and rivers of syrup, dreams of a smiling girl at a candy gate. "Come in," she whispered. "It's warm inside." Hansel's blood ran cold. He tried to ignore it, told himself it was just echoes, leftovers from the house, broken pieces that had drifted into the minds of children like pollen. Dreams didn't mean anything, except they all described her the same way. Red icing curls, eyes made of shining sugar pearls, a lavender ribbon around her neck, and always that voice, "Come in, it's warm inside." He sat up one night, breathing hard, sweat cold on his neck. He'd seen her again, but it wasn't Cookie Gretel. It wasn't even Gretel truly. It was a shadow made of sugar, standing at the foot of his bed. Her smile was patient. "You let me burn," she said. He blinked, and she was gone. The next day, he asked the blacksmith where the children played. The man frowned but pointed toward the woods. "They go toward the old hollow sometimes. There's a strange smell there, sweet, like burnt almonds." Hansel left before the sun set. He followed the scent. It was faint but familiar, caramel and rot, through underbrush and thorn, through broken stones and moss-covered ruins. He followed it until he found what remained, a small cottage, not like the house. This one was crude, made of real wood, newly built, but hanging above the door was a sign carved with a child's handwriting, "The Treat Home." Hansel's hands began to shake. He stepped inside. It was quiet. The walls were bare. The hearth was cold. But on the table, neatly arranged in a porcelain tray, were rows of cookies, all shaped like children, all smiling, and in the corner of the room, sitting very still, was a girl. She was no older than 10, her hands folded in her lap, her dress lavender with a ribbon at the throat. She turned and smiled at him. "Hello, Hansel," she said. He stepped back. "No." "Yes," she said gently. "You died." "I always do," she replied. "But you keep making me." Hansel shook his head. "I didn't build this house." "No," she agreed. "I did." The girl stood. Her skin cracked as she moved, just slightly, a whisper of sugar beneath her arms. Her smile didn't waver. "You gave me your grief," she said, "your need, your guilt. That was enough. The house may be gone, but what we made together, me, I stayed." Hansel clenched his fists. "You're not her." "No," she said, stepping closer, "but I'm the part you refused to bury." Outside, he heard footsteps, children's voices. They were coming to the cottage, drawn to the scent, the promise. Hansel moved toward the hearth. It was empty, but beside it lay a matchbook and a bottle of oil. He looked back at her, the sugar girl, the last of Cookie Gretel. "You can't burn me again," she whispered, almost pleading. "You already tried. You already lost." He struck the match, held it to the oil-soaked logs. Flames leapt to life, and this time they welcomed him. He sat at the hearth as the fire spread. The walls caught first, the ceiling next. The children outside saw the smoke and turned away. The girl stood by the window, her smile finally fading. "You'll never be rid of me," she said. Hansel looked at her through the flames. "I know," and he let it all burn. The fire took everything. Again, the cottage fell faster than the first house, as if it knew it didn't deserve to linger. The wood popped and screamed in its death throes, and the air was thick with smoke that reeked of burnt sugar and regret. No screams came from inside, no movement, just the rising pillar of black and pink smoke curling into the night sky like a final warning. The villagers watched it from the hill. Children clutched to their parents, murmurs in the dark. By morning, all that remained was a ring of ash, and in the middle of it, two things: a cracked porcelain teacup and a half-melted gingerbread heart. The villagers said nothing, but the children dreamed differently that night. No sweetness, only fire. Hansel did not die, not entirely. He woke in the dark, as he had many times before, with ash in his mouth and heat in his bones. The fire never consumed him fully. It only carved away what was still soft, still human. Now, something else stirred in his place. He opened his eyes and saw only grey, wood smoke fog drifting through the trees. The clearing where the treat home had stood was empty. He rose slowly, his body aching, every joint filled with coals. The house was gone. Cookie Gretel too, or so he thought. He wondered again. The hunger came first, not for food, but for feeling, for sweetness, for memory. He found himself chewing on pieces of bark that reminded him of gingerbread, collecting pine sap and licking it from his fingers. None of it satisfied. His dreams were worse. He saw her again, but not the Cookie Gretel he had made. Not even the real Gretel. This version stood just outside his reach, her mouth sewn shut with red licorice thread, her eyes two glass beads filled with moving shadows. She never spoke, but she pointed to the east, always the east. So one morning, Hansel went east. There, in the ruins of a long abandoned village, he found the well. It was nothing special, just stone and moss and vines. But the moment he saw it, he knew. The wind changed, the air turned sweet, and he could hear it, dripping. Not water, molasses, thick, dark, slow. He leaned over the edge. The shaft descended into shadow, and from its depths came a whisper that didn't reach his ears. It poured straight into his mind. You could still have her. He stepped back, hands trembling. No, he said aloud. I burned it all. The voice laughed. You burned the house, not the hunger. A shape began to rise from the well, not a body, but a smell. Sugar and scorched almonds, icing and blood. It wrapped around him like smoke, coaxing, tempting. She wants to come back. I don't, but you will. He fled, but no matter how far he ran, the dreams returned. The smell, the sound of her voice, soft, sticky, wrong. Come in, it's warm inside. And slowly, Hansel realized the truth. The house had never been a place. It was a pattern, a recipe. And once you tasted it, you could never spit it out. He stayed in a town for a while, tried to live, tried to forget. He worked in a bakery, kneading dough, shaping loaves, keeping his head down. The oven was old and loud. Its heat reminded him of screams, but the flour under his nails, the rhythm of rising bread, it kept him grounded until the girl came in. She was small, thin, hair in lavender ribbons, and she smiled at him. He dropped the tray. It shattered on the floor. The girl looked confused. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked sweetly. Hansel backed away. "Where are your parents?" "They're shopping," she said. "But I followed the smell. It's warm in here." He nearly vomited. That night, he broke into the bakery. He set it on fire. The blaze danced up the walls and licked at the shelves, consuming years of flour and yeast and sugar. People came running. They tried to put it out. He didn't let them. He watched it burn, and as he did, he whispered into the flames, "You won't trick me again?" But deep in the coals, something laughed. He left again. This time he wandered further, past rivers, mountains, into cold lands where the smell of sugar never reached. He let the frost numb him, let the cold make him forget. He lived in caves, ate moss, spoke to no one, but still, on the coldest nights, he heard her voice, softer now, more tired. "Come in." Years passed. He grew old, or so he thought, but when he caught his reflection in a frozen lake, he realized he hadn't aged. Not a wrinkle, not a grey hair. He was still the boy who had become the host. The fire had preserved him. The house had branded him. One day, a caravan passed through the icy forest. A travelling troupe, actors, jugglers, fortune-tellers. They invited him to join, mistaking him for a hermit or a wizard. He refused at first, but then he saw one of them, the girl with red hair and green eyes. She looked like Gretel, not quite, but enough. He followed the troupe, not to speak, but to watch. They stopped in villages. They told stories. One night, around a fire, the red-haired girl told him her favourite tale. Once there were two children lost in the woods. They found a house made of candy. The others listened. Hansel didn't breathe, and the witch tried to eat them, but the girl, clever and brave, pushed her into the oven. They escaped. They lived happily ever after. The crowd clapped. The fire crackled. Hansel stood up. "That's not how it ends," he said. The crowd turned. The girl looked startled. "What?" He stepped closer. "That's not the ending." Silence. He looked into the fire. She never escaped. Neither did he. They became the house. It still lives, and it's always hungry. The crowd laughed nervously, thought he was part of the act, but the girl looked into his eyes and didn't smile. She saw something there, a memory, not hers, not yet, but coming. That night, he left the troupe, but not before leaving a bundle at the girl's tent. Inside it, a cookie shaped like a child, with her name iced across the chest. The red-haired girl didn't sleep that night. Not after finding the bundle, not after unwrapping the wax cloth and discovering the child-shaped cookie with her name, Elsa, written in pale blue icing across its chest. The sugar had begun to melt by morning, as though the cookie had been sweating. She didn't tell the others. She just wrapped it up again, buried it under her bedroll, and listened to the fire hiss in the hearth. When she finally fell asleep, the dreams came, the same one over and over. A forest of licorice trees, a door shaped like a gumdrop, and a girl in a lavender ribbon whispering, "Come in, it's warm inside." Hansel watched from the edge of the camp. He hadn't approached her again. He wouldn't. He knew how the story moved. It didn't need his help now. It was like a wheel, rolling downhill, gathering speed, crushing anything in its path. Still, he stayed nearby, like a ghost tethered to his last mistake. Elsa was 16, bold, kind to animals. She liked to braid her hair into thick cords that bounced when she walked. She played the flute. She knew nothing of ovens. She reminded him too much of someone else. The troop moved on, and Hansel followed. He never got too close, just enough to hear the laughter, the clatter of wagon wheels, the smell of firewood and stew. But as they travelled east, the air began to change. The wind tasted sweeter. The trees grew quiet. Children began to whisper of dreams. One boy spoke of a room with walls made of peanut brittle. A girl said she saw a candy staircase that led down and down into sugar shadows. And Elsa, she began baking. It started innocently. Bread, mostly, rolls, hard biscuits for the road. But then she began making gingerbread, not from a recipe book, from memory. "I don't know where I learned it," she told the woman who taught her to knead dough. "It just feels right." Her fingers moved fast, almost feverish. She smiled when the oven hissed. Hansel broke into the camp one night. He waited until the fire was low and the guards dozed in their cloaks. Then he crept through the wagons until he found her. Elsa's tent smelled like spice and sugar. He stepped inside and froze. There, lined up in a neat little row, were 4 cookies, child-shaped. Each bore a name. Not Elsa's, not yet, but soon. He stepped back, only to feel the cold point of a blade pressed against his spine. "Don't move," Elsa said. He turned. She looked smaller than she had by the firelight. Her hair was loose, her face pale. "Who are you?" she asked. "Why do you keep following us?" Hansel swallowed. "You're dreaming of it, aren't you?" Her eyes narrowed. "Of her?" he nodded. "She's finding a way back through you." Elsa didn't lower the blade. "Who is she?" "Your shadow," Hansel said. "Mine too. I made her, then I killed her, then she came back. She always comes back." He took a breath. "And if you bake her, she'll live again." Elsa glanced at the cookies on her table. "They aren't her." "No," Hansel said. "But they're the recipe." She hesitated. The knife wavered. "I'm not like you." Hansel didn't argue. He stepped past her, reached into his cloak, and placed something on the table. The heart. The one he'd carried since the treat home burned. Half melted, still sweet. still beating. "You don't have to finish what I started." She stared at the thing in silence. Then slowly she nodded. The next morning, the troop found Hansel gone, and Elsa too. Only the wagon tracks remained, leading deeper into the woods. But one of the boys found something tucked beneath a cooking pot. A note, written in careful icing. "Don't follow. The oven is never empty." Elsa walked beside Hansel for 3 days before speaking again. They didn't eat, didn't rest. The forest guided them, old and watchful. At last, they came to a clearing, a flat circle of earth, blackened and bare, the birthplace of the first house. "Here," Hansel said, falling to his knees. "This is where it started." Elsa knelt beside him, her hands trembling. She placed the heart in the centre. The earth quivered, the wind stopped, the sky darkened, clouds gathering fast, and lo, a storm, thick with ash and sugar. The ground cracked, and from beneath the soil, roots emerged. Not trees, licorice. They curled toward the heart like hungry fingers. Elsa looked at Hansel. "Is this what she wants?" Hansel shook his head. "This is what she is." Elsa reached into her bag, pulled out the matchbox, lit a flame. The licorice roots recoiled, hissing. The sky groaned, and from the centre of the earth, a whisper emerged, one both of them had heard before. "Don't burn me again." Elsa looked down. "Why not?" "I'll be good this time," the voice said, soft as syrup. "I'll be better." Hansel closed his eyes. "She always says that." Elsa dropped the match. The heart ignited. The fire spread fast, too fast. The roots screamed, flailing. The ground trembled. The sky split open, raining down ash and pink snow. Hansel took Elsa's hand, and this time he was the one who whispered, "Don't let go." They stayed until morning. The clearing was ash once more. Nothing sweet remained. Elsa bent, gathered the last scrap of licorice root, and buried it beneath a stone. "A warning," she said. Hansel smiled weakly. "Or a seed." They left the forest together. The path behind them sealed shut. The dreams quieted, but sometimes, when the wind was just right, Elsa thought she heard a girl's voice on the breeze. "Come in, it's warm inside." And she'd shiver and keep walking. Years passed. The house was gone, its ashes buried beneath frost and time. The land healed slowly. Trees grew again where licorice once sprouted. Moss returned to rocks, once slick with syrup. The animals forgot first, then the trees, then slowly the people. But not Hansel, and not Elsa. They did not live ordinary lives, though they tried. Elsa became a teacher in a small village by the sea. She wore her hair in braids and baked only simple bread. No sugar, no ginger, no spices that smelled like memory. She taught children how to read, how to think, how to question, and never once did she speak of candy houses or cookie girls. But every year, on the longest night of winter, She fasted, and she left a single crust of burnt toast on the windowsill. A warning, a sacrifice, or maybe both. Hansel wondered, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. He was still a part of it, the house, the recipe, the curse. His body didn't age. His shadow still flickered with firelight. Birds avoided him. Dogs growled in his presence. He could not stay anywhere long, but he could watch, and he did. Whenever rumours began of a strange dream shared by children, or a house no adult could see, or a girl with sugar in her voice and icing on her lashes, he found the village, and he stopped it. He burned more than a few kitchens, some hearts too. He was not a hero, but he tried to be a shield. Then one day he returned to the clearing, the place where it all began. The earth was cold and quiet. The licorice roots never returned. The stone Elsa had placed over the last fragment was now covered in moss, but something else had appeared. A single tree. It stood where the heart had burned, tall and pale, its bark soft and papery. Its fruit looked like sugar plums, but they smelled faintly of scorched gingerbread. Hansel approached, hung a talisman of bitter herbs from one of its branches, and turned away. But as he walked, he heard something rustle, not the wind, a voice, her voice. Hansel. He froze, slowly turned. The tree's bark split, and from its centre emerged a figure. She wasn't Gretel, and she wasn't the cookie. She was something older, something the house had only borrowed a face from. Tall, gaunt, with skin like wax, and eyes like boiled sugar. Her mouth curled up in a smile, too wide for a child. Her arms draped with melted ribbons. Her breath smelled like funeral cakes and frost. "You never let go," she said sweetly. Hansel backed away. "You're dead." She cocked her head. "I never lived. What are you?" "I'm the flavour," she said, stepping forward. "The craving, the recipe etched into blood. I am what the witch worshipped, what the oven served, what the house was built to house." Her smile stretched. "And you, Hansel, were my perfect host." He ran, but the forest bent, twisted, brought him back. She waited by the tree. "You burned the body," she said, "but not the hunger. It's still in you, still in her." Hansel clenched his fists. "We chose to end it, and yet here you are." She stepped closer. Her fingers brushed his chest. "You miss the warmth, the safety, the sweetness, the certainty." "No," she laughed softly. "Then why do you keep coming back?" He said nothing, because he couldn't, because she was right. Even now, some part of him yearned for it. The order of the house, the rules, the role, to be useful, to be needed, to feed and be fed. He closed his eyes, and in that silence a voice rose, not hers, Elsa's. "Don't let it grow." He opened his eyes, reached into his coat, and pulled out a knife made not of metal, but of bitter root and black stone, gifted by a forest that remembered. She hissed. The sweetness in the air curdled. "You can't kill me," she said. "I am taste. I am want." Hansel lunged. The knife sank into her chest. She did not bleed, but she cracked. Like glass, like sugar under too much heat. She screamed, not in pain, but in rage. The forest howled with her. The tree burst into flame, and she shattered into pieces that scattered on the wind like glittering ash. Hansel fell to his knees. The fire roared behind him, and then silence. This time it felt real, final. He left the forest once more, travelled west, then further still, to a place where no one had ever heard of gingerbread houses or children made of dough. He changed his name, forgot the taste of sugar, carried no sweets, spoke only of salt, but deep in the earth something small and sweet still slept. Not a house, not a girl, just a seed, waiting, because the flavour never truly dies. It only waits for someone to taste it again.